Hello everyone, and welcome to a brief tutorial on how external power flows through your Hawker 125 series aircraft. Let's get into it. In today's presentation, I'll cover the path of power from the ground power cart to the PS1 and PS2 bus bars, from the cart to the engine starter generators, and from the cart to the X1 terminal post of the ground power contactor. For the wiring prints used in this presentation, power from the cart to the PS1, PS2, and the starter generators will be shown in red. Power from the cart to pin X1 of the ground supply contactor will be shown in yellow, and from the cart to pin X1 of the ground contact control relay will be shown in brown. Two shapes of the same color will show a connection between two pictures in this presentation. For example, the ground supply contactor will be called out with a blue box on every wiring print, as well as a picture of the GA panel later in the presentation. In the next couple of slides, the battery switch is in the off position, the ground power cart is hooked up to the aircraft, and the ground supply master switch is in the off position. As we zoom in, you can see a ground signal on the cart's negative terminal. From the short pin of the cart, we should have power available on either side of the diode DA, as well as on pin Bravo 1 of the ground contact control relay. From the long positive pin of the cart, power should be available at pins Alpha 2, Bravo 2, and Charlie 2 of the ground supply contactor, as well as pin Sierra of the overvoltage sensor. Looking at our next wiring print, and zooming in, we can see diode DA, as well as part of the internal start contactor in its relaxed position. Power flows through diode DA to pin Charlie 5 of the internal start contactor, and bounces back to the previous wiring diagram. Power will also flow through the normally closed contact of the internal start contactor, out of pin Charlie 4, and around to our next wiring diagram. In our next wiring diagram, zooming in shows us there should be a ground signal waiting at pin 4 of the ground master supply switch, followed by the power from our previous diagram waiting at pin 2 of the ground supply master switch. From this point on, the ground supply master switch will be in the on position, allowing the ground signal to travel out of pin 5 of the ground supply master switch and out to another drawing, while also allowing the power waiting at pin 2 of the switch to travel out pin 1 and over to another wiring print. You may recognize this wiring print from earlier in the presentation. I'm including this to demonstrate that regardless of the ground supply master switch position, when the cart is plugged into the aircraft and the internal start contactor is relaxed, power should be available at pin Charlie 4 and Charlie 5 of the internal start contactor. We now return to the first wiring print, looking just as it did while the ground supply master switch is in the off position. When the supply master switch is moved to the on position, power should become available at pin X1 of the ground contact control relay, and a ground signal should become available on pin X2 of the control relay, as well as pin Golf and Papa of the overvoltage sensor. If the sensor reads good voltage on pin Sierra, the ground signal at pin Papa will travel out pin India and to pin 2 of the ground supply contactor. With power and ground at the contact control relay, the contactor should actuate closed, allowing power waiting at pin Bravo 1 of the control relay to provide power to pin X1 of the ground supply contactor. Actuating the supply contactor closed, and allowing power to flow through the contactor out of pin Alpha 1 to the PS1 bus bar, out of pin Charlie 1 to the PS2 bus bar, and out of pin Bravo 1 over to our next wiring print. When we zoom in, you can see part of the ground supply contactor, as well as a full illustration of the engine 1 start contactor, the engine 2 start contactor, and the internal start contactor, all in their relaxed position. With the ground supply contactor now closed, power should become available on pin Alpha 1 and Bravo 1 of the internal start contactor, pin Alpha 1 of the engine 1 start contactor, and pin Alpha 2 of the engine 2 start contactor. In our next wiring diagram, zooming in shows us power waiting on pin Alpha 1 of the engine 1 start contactor, and when the engine 1 start contactor is closed, power flows to pin Alpha 1 of the generator line contactor and out of pin Bravo or an out 2 pin Bravo of the starter generator. In a similar fashion, when we zoom into our next wiring diagram, we see power waiting at pin alpha 2 of the start contactor. And when the contactor is closed, power will flow just as it did for the engine 1 starter generator circuit. On the left is a picture of the GG panel showing diode DA in a purple box. And on the right is a picture of the ZK panel showing the ground contact control relay in a light blue box. On the left is a picture of the GA panel showing the number 1 engine start contactor in a light brown box, the engine 2 start contactor in a pink box, the ground supply contactor in a blue box, and the over voltage sensor in a blue-green box. On the right is a picture of the ZL panel showing the internal start contactor in a mint green box. Now let's look at a case where the ground supply cart is plugged in, the ground master supply switch is set to on, the battery switch is set to off, but for some reason you have no power at your PS1 and PS2 bus bars. The first thing to do is to double check that all 3 pins of the cart are mating to the aircraft. If that is not the problem, the next step is to follow the path of power from the cart to the PS1 and PS2 bus bars. The steps on screen get progressively more difficult to check based off the location of the panels and each component that is attached to them. While performing these checks, go through each step, making sure to record all your voltages and resistances until you find the component preventing the flow of power or ground signal. Thank you for joining me today for this brief tutorial on how external power reaches the bus bars of your Hawker 125 series aircraft. If you have any further questions on your Hawker 125 series or Hawker 4000 aircraft, the Hawker support team can be reached via the email and phone numbers on screen.